Are you waiting for a game you can spend the next year playing to the point that your family isn't sure if you're still alive or not? That's what Mainframe is trying to create with Pax Dei, and while testers like myself played for an excessive amount of time, we only had 2 weeks to play. Once Pax Dei enters early access, players will be able to grind to their heart's content, but what will keep those player subscriptions rolling in when they reach the end of their grind? From the information we have available right now, the skill and equipment grind is the only gameplay loop that exists in Pax Dei. I am very comfortable with comparing it to Valheim, but without the goal of defeating crazy bosses. And just like Valheim, the game feels great to play while you're in the middle of it, but once you create the highest tier items that are available in the game and you defeat the bosses, the drive to continue immediately vanishes. At least that's how it is for me. The last time I played Valheim seriously, I made it to the Mistlands, but I never found the boss and I moved on once I got bored looking. So once players in Pax Dei reach the current endgame during early access, what's going to keep them playing? The only information we have on the endgame of Pax Dei is from dungeons and how dangerous dungeons will be home to the most precious materials, which, if we're being honest, isn't much different than their recent discussion about their plans for gathering. In short, Mainframe said that they wanted to spread gatherable materials further into the wildlands to give players more of a reason to explore the world. This means that right now, endgame in Pax Dei consists of farming materials to make gear to farm more materials to fix and replace gear when it's worn out and breaks. Now, if I'm being honest, this is an oversimplified explanation of the current Pax Dei endgame, and it can easily be applied to many other games. However, Pax Dei is an MMO with a planned subscription-based monetization model, which means that the devs will need to drive players to want to play regularly even after they've grinded their chosen skills and built their plot to satisfaction. What comes after that is very important. The Alpha 2 that's coming up will probably show us more of the vision that the devs have for the game, but soon after that, we're all going to be hit with early access, and then what? Ashes of Creation has shown world bosses, city sieges, and dungeons as content that players can participate in as endgame activities. After they grind out their skills, get their own style set up, and have their character geared up the way they like, they have activities that can keep them busy and goals to work towards. And while all those systems sound cool, we won't get to play with them for a few years still. Then we have Pax Dei, where we're getting into the second alpha and early access both in the first half of 2024. And all we know for absolute certainty is that we're getting a very basic survival MMO. Thankfully, players aren't expected to pay a subscription during the early access period, so what I'm expecting during this period of time is a lot of feedback from players looking for more to do than gather, craft, and build. Once early access is in full swing, it's going to be really important for Mainframe to share their overarching plans for the endgame of Pax Dei, whether world bosses will be a thing, if dungeons will be more than just difficult farming nodes, and what other activity ideas they might have for players as development proceeds. I really wonder how this side of the game will turn out when endgame systems and activities wind up being tested during early access, and how the devs will change them depending on the feedback that they receive from players. With that in mind, let's speculate about what kind of endgame activities we might see or that we could influence Mainframe to implement that would also work well within the world of Pax Dei. World bosses unique to the various regions and biomes of each map would be pretty easy to implement. Just make a monster, scale it up, and give it a large health pool. The trick, of course, would be creating a system within the game that either notified the players about the world boss threat or allowed scouts to announce the presence of a world boss to the region, allowing players in the area to gather their forces to take down the threat. The biggest problem that a world boss like this would generate is how the loot would be distributed among the participants. We already know that Mainframe wants crafting materials to be the primary loot that players venture into the world to obtain, but when you have a large number of players fighting over one world boss, giving the loot to the first few people who click the corpse would introduce a vulture meta to the game, and I'm not sure that the devs would enjoy seeing that type of gameplay, let alone alone the kind of griefing that could be present depending on how they implement the PvP system. As of the first alpha, every lootable mob and node within the game gives the loot to the player who clicks the node or the body first. If a tree needs one more hit to be gathered, a vulture could come in, hit it, and take the loot that it gave. If a player kills a mob, another player could come in and loot the corpse before the first player could. If this doesn't change for a world boss, it could be very problematic. There is a solution though. Within dungeons, there are loot piles that players can loot individually to get their share of the pile. It's a little janky in the alpha, and we needed to take turns to make sure that it functioned properly. But if a world boss dropped a bag of items that all the players could loot individually, everyone could get something for their efforts. And then vultures could pick up whatever other players dropped on the ground to clear their own inventory space. During that same time span, if players were looking for specific materials, there could be an impromptu marketplace created where players would trade unwanted boss loot for wanted boss loot. Say for example, we beat a boss and I got some gem. I could trade it to somebody else in the area who wanted the gem and get a piece of hide or something in return. It's super simplistic, but it might work within the vision that the devs have for Pax Dei. Raids, on the other hand, are simply difficult dungeons, so until combat is actually figured out, we probably won't see dungeon bosses with complicated mechanics. At the very least, raid-level dungeons will require more coordination and build planning than what we did in the first alpha. Taking a swarm of naked players into a dungeon is funny, but I'm pretty sure that that's not exactly within the devs' vision for the game. They also emphasize the holy trinity of MMOs, so we know for sure that a party composition is going to be important. But with the dungeons themselves being open to multiple player groups, will alliances be available for those raid-level dungeons? Then, like the solution we had for world bosses, the same could be done for all other bosses in the game that require the cooperation of several groups of players. Outside of combat, it's going to be interesting to see what Mainframe implements to help players trade with each other. Marketplace PvP is a real thing, and when talking about endgame content, buying, selling, and trading endgame materials is just as important as finding and using them. Face-to-face trading will only work within a heartland. Auction houses might need to work in a similar way to a Fallout 4 settlement route system. One clan builds an auction house and sets up a caravan trade route that connects that auction house to the auction house in another area belonging to another friendly clan. Then for PvP purposes, maybe those caravans could be attacked somehow, but I'm sure that system would be far in the future of development and wouldn't be anywhere near as in-depth as we've seen in Ashes of Creation. There is, of course, the option of a player-run market stall, but I'm not sure how many players would be willing to stand around and do nothing but wait for players to come and buy things. It would be really interesting to see how Mainframe implements a system like this to be engaging and functional at the same time. I can't deny that role-playing a shopkeeper has a sort of appeal, but if I miss a sale because I'm out farming leather, I'd probably be pretty annoyed depending on how often it happened. I'm sure we'll find out what Mainframe is planning for player trade during early access. Regardless, I'm really hoping that we don't see Pax Dei auction houses outside of the game. This is what Path of Exile users are stuck with since the game itself only supports face-to-face trading, which is a colossal pain in the ass. Whatever Mainframe has planned for Pax Dei, we're going to get our answers much sooner than we originally thought, and I'm really excited to jump into the game again. Anyway, that's all I've got for you today. You're welcome.